Every nerve in her body screamed at the peril of what lay ahead. But the years of isolated hacking, countless nights spent unraveling digital labyrinths, and the recent alliance with Ethan Shaw steeled her resolve. Beside her, Ethan's silhouette moved with practiced silence, eyes scanning, muscles taut, ready to spring into action. Ahead, the hum of machinery grew louder, a subtle, rhythmic pulse that betrayed the presence of the core control room. This was the heart of the sinister project that had turned this luxury skyscraper into a prison of minds. 10 floors below ground, where no light of day or hope had ever touched, Dr. Marcus Vell awaited. The man whose cold calculations had erased memories, manipulated identities, and shattered lives? Lila's fingers twitched with anticipation, the weight of her portable hacking deck snug in her backpack a comforting anchor. The plan was simple but perilous: infiltrate the core, confront Vell, and broadcast the damning evidence stored within the system's deepest vaults. What came after depended on her ability to outwit a man who had spent years perfecting control. They rounded a corner and Ethan signaled a halt, pointing to a security camera sweeping the corridor ahead. Lila's pulse quickened. Using a small device, she jammed the signal momentarily, the red light blinking off. They slipped past, shadows amid sterile steel and muted lights. The door to the control room loomed, a thick slab of reinforced glass and steel, etched with the corporation's emblem. Lila took a deep breath and tapped her wrist console, fingers flying as she bypassed the biometric locks. The door hissed open, revealing Dr. Vell seated behind a sleek console, fingers steepled, eyes cold behind thin-rimmed glasses. "Welcome, Ms. Morgan," he said smoothly, voice calm but carrying an edge of menace. "I wondered when you'd arrive." Lila stepped inside, gaze unwavering. "Your experiments end here, Vell. I have the data to prove everything." He smiled thinly. "You think exposing the truth will undo progress? Control is evolution. Something you hackers fail to grasp. Words were their weapons now, each testing the other's resolve, probing for weakness." But the calm shattered as an alarm blared, red lights flooding the room. Javier Cruz and a squad of security operatives stormed in, weapons raised. Without hesitation, Lila dove behind a console, Ethan intercepting a guard charging toward her. The room erupted into chaos, a deadly dance of fists and hacking, the flicker of gunfire, and the clatter of shattered glass. Layla's hands flew over her deck, overriding security protocols and opening digital backdoors. She hacked cameras, locked doors, and disrupted the communications of their attackers. The battle was brutal, every second a fight for survival and control. Breathing heavily, bruised and bleeding, Lila reached the mainframe terminal. Her vision blurred, fingers trembling as she uploaded the incriminating files. The broadcast began live, unfiltered, impossible to silence. Outside, the world began to awaken to the truth. Inside, the room fell silent save for the steady beep of the system confirming transmission. Layla slumped against the console, exhaustion and relief mingling in her chest. Dr. Vell's face twisted in rage and disbelief as his empire crumbled with the click of a button. Yet, beneath it all, a flicker of something else, respect perhaps, for the hacker who dared to defy him. Layla's journey was far from over, but in this moment, she had reclaimed a piece of her fractured identity and struck a blow for freedom. The skyscraper's 10 hidden floors would no longer be a prison for secrets. "This isn't the end," she whispered to the empty room. "It's just the beginning." Outside, the city lights flickered, reflecting in the glass facade of the skyscraper silent witnesses to a revolution sparked 10 floors below. Lila Morgan's fingers hovered for a moment over the keyboard, the air thick with tension. Outside, the city pulsed with oblivious life, unaware that the truth was about to shatter their fragile peace. She took a steadying breath, the weight of months of risk and sacrifice pressing in on her. Tonight, the silence would break. With a final keystroke, the encrypted files began to stream live, bypassing firewalls and cutting through layers of corporate censorship. Lila's screen burst into a kaleidoscope of images, grainy footage of sterile chambers, cold instruments pulsating with eerie light, and data logs detailing experiments that manipulated minds and erased memories. The faces of victims, blurred but haunting, flickered across news channels citywide. A low hum of static filled the cramped room as the broadcast spread like wildfire. Ethan Shaw stood at her side, his usual easy smile replaced by a taut expression. They're watching. But this is unstoppable. Dr. Naomi Chin's delicate frame was tense but resolute. The world needs to see this. It's the only way. Miles away, in apartments, offices, and even bustling cafes, the city froze. Smartphones buzzed with notifications. Television switched to breaking news. Gasps and murmurs rose as viewers absorbed the revelations. The skyscraper's glass facade gleamed under the setting sun, an unyielding monolith that now bore the weight of exposed secrets. News anchors struggled to maintain composure as the footage continued. "This is unprecedented," one intoned, voice wavering. A luxury building hiding a sub-basement where mind control experiments were conducted on unsuspecting residents. Officials in government offices watched in alarm, phones ringing off the hook. Urgent meetings convened behind closed doors, the foundations of trust between public and power shaking. Orders were whispered, investigations launched, and media outlets prepared for the storm. Back in the sub-basement, Layla's heart raced as alarms began to blare. Security forces alerted to the breach. But among the chaos, a rare smile touched her lips. She had done it, the truth was out. Ethan's voice was steady, but edged with urgency. "We need to move. They'll be here any second." Naomi nodded, her eyes gleaming with fierce hope. For the first time, people know. That's power. Lila stood and gazed one last time at the glowing screens, their digital rebellion woven into the fabric of the city. The battle was far from over, but a crack had formed in the corporate armor. As footsteps thundered down the corridor, she felt a surge of defiance. This was only the beginning. "They thought they could control minds without consequence," Lila whispered, voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "But control is a fragile thing. And today we broke the silence." The door slammed open and the shadows of security guards spilled into the room. Lila squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. In the war for truth and freedom, every second counted. Outside, the city's pulse quickened with the shockwave of revelation. Somewhere in the depths, 10 floors below, a new chapter was just beginning. Below, the skyscraper she had once called home was now a fortress under siege, not by soldiers but by scrutiny. Swarms of media vans, government agents, and curious onlookers clogged the streets, their bright lights and persistent questions illuminating a truth that had long been buried 10 floors below ground. She pulled her coat tighter, her sharp gaze drifting across the chaotic scene. The broadcast had shattered the illusion of safety and control. The revelation of mind control experiments hidden beneath the luxury glass and steel facade had rocked corporations and governments alike. But the price of that truth was etched into the lines around her eyes and the tightness in her chest. Inside a sterile interrogation room not far away, Dr. Marcus Vell sat with the impeccable composure that had made him so terrifying. His thin-rimmed glasses caught the harsh overhead light as he met the gaze of the questioning officers. Calm, cold, unrepentant, he was a man who believed in his vision, no matter the cost. The corporate board's once shadowy puppet master was now exposed, but his silence was a promise that the fight was far from over. Back in the cramped safe house, Ethan Shaw was busy patching up the bruises on Lila's hands, remnants of their last violent encounter with security loyalists. His rugged charm was dimmed by fatigue, the reckless spark in his eyes now tempered by caution. "You've pushed yourself too hard," he muttered, handing her a bandage. Layla shook her head, fingers still trembling as she resumed scanning the hacked data streams on her laptop. The evidence they'd gathered was more than proof it was a weapon. Yet the lurking threat in every shadow reminded them that exposure was just the beginning. Dr. Naomi Chion's voice trembled as she addressed a small gathering of activists and journalists in a discreet location. Her delicate features, framed by the sterile light of the room, betrayed the anxiety beneath her professional exterior. "This is not just about technology," she said steadily. "It's about the sanctity of human identity and the ethical boundaries we must defend. The damage done here will ripple for years, but hope lies in vigilance and transparency. Outside, Javier Cruz, Marcus's former security chief, moved like a shadow, silent, imposing, and unwavering. Though the mastermind was detained, Cruz's loyalty had not wavered. His presence was a constant reminder that the corporate forces they had dismantled still wielded power in the dark. Lila knew he was watching, waiting for a misstep. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, encrypted communications, and covert meetings. Layla found herself caught between the exhilaration of victory and the weight of survival. Memories once fractured by manipulation slowly pieced themselves together, but the scars remained raw. Trust was a fragile commodity. Every ally was a potential risk. One evening, as the rain fell again in steady sheets, Lila sat alone with Ethan and Naomi in their hideout. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated their weary faces. "This isn't over," Lila said quietly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "They'll come after us. We need a plan not just to survive, but to keep fighting." Ethan nodded, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "We've exposed the monster, but the head's just been cut off. The body still writhes." Naomi added, "And the science, the technology won't disappear overnight. We have to be the ones who set the rules now." Outside, the city pulsed with restless energy, a place forever changed by the revelations buried 10 floors below. Layla's journey had taken her into the darkest depths of human consciousness and corporate greed. Now, standing amid the ruins of deception, she faced a new challenge: rebuilding trust, reclaiming identity, and guarding freedom in a world still hungry for control. As the night deepened, her eyes flicked to the window. Somewhere in the shadows, the next move was being made. And she would be ready. The fight was far from over. But Lila Morgan was no longer alone, and this time she would not be silenced. She sat hunched on the edge of a worn couch, hands trembling as she cycled through fragmented holographic memories, ghostly faces, half-remembered conversations, and places she could no longer be sure were real or implanted. The sleek, clinical glow of the images contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside her mind. It had been weeks since the broadcast, since the world had glimpsed the dark underbelly of the skyscraper and the sinister experiments conducted 10 floors below. The fallout had shaken corporations and governments alike, but for Layla, the victory was bittersweet. The battle had left scars deeper than any physical wound. Her memories, once a sanctuary of certainty, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. Her phone buzzed softly on the glass table. Ethan's name illuminated the screen. She hesitated, fingers hovering before swiping to answer. "Lila, you okay?" Ethan's voice was steady, but the concern was unmistakable. She exhaled slowly, the weight of exhaustion pressing down. "I don't know anymore. Sometimes I look at these memories and I can't tell if they're mine or some fabrication." "You're not alone in this," Ethan said, his tone firm yet gentle. "We'll get through it. You're stronger than you think." The promise of support was a fragile lifeline, but Lila's distrust lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. She had always been fiercely independent, reluctant to let anyone close. The betrayal by corporations had taught her that trust could be a weapon used against you. Later that night, a soft knock echoed through her apartment. Dr. Naomi Chun stepped inside, her presence tentative but resolute. She carried a small medical kit, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I've been running some tests," Naomi began, her voice low. "The memory fragmentation you're experiencing isn't just psychological. There are neurological disruptions consistent with the treatments used in the sub-basement." Layla listened, the clinical explanation doing little to soothe the turmoil inside. Yet Naomi's empathy offered a rare comfort, a reminder that beneath the cold technology, human cost endured. "You're not broken beyond repair," Naomi said softly. "There's a way to stabilize your memories, to reclaim parts of yourself stolen by them. But it will take time, and it won't be easy." The path ahead was daunting. Each step toward healing meant confronting the shadows of her past and the lingering presence of those who sought to control her. But Lila knew retreat was not an option. Days later, in the solitude of the skyscraper's communal lounge, Lila faced a shattered mirror. The fractured reflection staring back was a mosaic of pain and resilience. She touched the cold glass, feeling the jagged edges beneath her fingertips. "Who am I now?" she whispered. The question hung in the air. unanswered but charged with the fierce determination that had carried her through every trial. The fight for identity was far from over, but Lila Morgan was no longer just a survivor. She was a warrior reclaiming her fractured self. Outside, the city pulsed with neon light and endless possibility. 10 floors below, the echoes of control still whispered. But above all, Layla's resolve burned brighter than ever, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. As dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of another day, Layla allowed herself a moment of fragile hope. The journey was far from complete, but she had taken the first step toward healing, and that was enough to keep the fire alive. The fractured reflections would not define her. She would piece herself together, one shard at a time, until the whole was stronger than ever before. And when the shadows came calling again, Lila Morgan would be ready. For the first time in months, she allowed the walls she had so meticulously built around herself to thin, if only slightly. Ethan sat across from her, his easy smile tempered by the seriousness behind his eyes. The city beyond the window blurred into streaks of gold and gray, indistinct and distant, as if the world had momentarily paused to give her this fragile moment. Ethan began, his voice soft but steady. For someone who's been running from everything, you've done more than most could imagine. But you don't have to do it alone. Layla's fingers traced the rim of her cup, the warmth grounding her. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trust doesn't come easy when your memories aren't your own, and every shadow feels like a threat." He nodded, leaning in, his gaze unwavering. "I get that. But maybe it's time to stop fighting yourself. You've got people who want to help." The vulnerability in her chest was both terrifying and oddly comforting. She had spent so long wrapped in skepticism, but the weight of isolation was heavier than she'd allowed herself to admit. Later that evening, Layla found herself in Naomi's cramped apartment, a stark contrast to the sterile corridors of the sub-basement that haunted her memories. The room was cluttered with research papers, medical journals, and flickering screens displaying streams of data. Naomi stood near a battered desk, her delicate features drawn tight with concentration as she explained the latest findings. "The technology they're using," Naomi said quietly, "it's more invasive than we thought. Not just memory erasure, but emotional conditioning, rewiring how people feel and react. The human cost is devastating." Layla listened, absorbing every word, the urgency of their mission settling over her like a mantle. Despite the danger, the presence of someone else who understood, who shared her burden, was a balm to her frayed nerves. Days passed, and small moments of connection began to stitch together the torn fabric of her existence. Mildred Hayes, the elderly concierge whose sharp eyes had once only seemed a nuisance, now became a quiet ally. In the dimly lit lobby, the rustle of paper was almost imperceptible as Mildred slipped a folded note into Layla's hand. The words inside hinted at hidden access points and vulnerabilities in the buildings, security precious intelligence wrapped in the trust of an unexpected friendship. As dusk melted into night, Lila often found herself on the rooftop, the city sprawling beneath her like a glittering web of possibility and peril. The cool wind tugged at her dark hair, carrying with it the distant sounds of life and the faint pulse of neon lights. Here, away from prying eyes and digital eyes alike, she allowed herself to breathe. The tangled weight of paranoia loosened, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of connection and purpose. "Trust," she murmured to the night sky, "isn't just a gift. It's a choice." And for the first time in a long time, Layla was ready to choose it. But with trust came risk. Every alliance, every shared secret, was a thread that could be pulled to unravel her fragile defenses. The enemies she'd made, corporate shadows lurking just beyond the edges of her awareness, would not hesitate to exploit any weakness. Yet the alternative was isolation, a slow suffocation that had nearly claimed her sanity. The chapter closed on Lila's quiet resolve, the rooftop lights flickering behind her like distant beacons. The fight was far from over, but she was no longer alone. And sometimes that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. Tomorrow, she thought, we take back more than memories. We take back trust. Her journey was far from finished, but this night marked a new beginning. The apartment, once a refuge of solitude, now felt like a cage watched from all directions. Her fingers tapped relentlessly, chasing digital ghosts through encrypted layers, seeking anomalies in the endless data streams that flowed through the Skyscraper's network. It had been weeks since the broadcast had shaken the foundations of corporate power, exposing Dr. Marcus Vell's horrific experiments. Yet the victory felt hollow. The Skyscraper's facade gleamed with polished denial, but beneath that surface, Lila sensed the echoes of control reverberating in the silence. The mind control technology she discovered had not been eradicated, it simply evolved. A series of subtle glitches in the building systems hinted at nanoscale neural implants, devices so small they slipped past conventional scanners. The corporation's reach had shifted into shadows, weaving its influence through invisible tendrils inside residents' minds. Layla's pulse quickened as she realized the scope of the battle ahead. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime-in encrypted message from Naomi Shun. They arranged a meeting in a discreet location, far from prying eyes and ears. When Lila arrived, Naomi's delicate frame was tense, her usually composed demeanor frayed by the weight of new discoveries. "They're moving to neural implants," Naomi whispered, glancing nervously at the doorway. "Tiny devices injected under the skin, capable of subtle manipulation. They're harder to detect, harder to remove?" Layla nodded, the cold dread settling deeper in her chest. "It means we're dealing with an invisible enemy now. Our usual tools won't be enough." Ethan Shaw joined them later, his tall frame blending into the shadows as he shared his observations from the building's perimeter. Security measures had intensified, biometric scanners replaced keycards. Surveillance cameras with facial recognition upgraded to track micro-expressions. Every corner of the skyscraper was a cage made of glass and data. Together, they forged a plan to probe the new defenses, aware that every step forward invited retaliation. The tension was palpable as they moved through the cold corridors, haunted by the knowledge that control could come from inside their own minds. One evening, as Lila navigated a deserted floor searching for a data relay, a figure emerged from the darkness. Javier Cruz, Marcus Vell's relentless security chief. His presence was an ominous reminder that the battle was far from over. "You shouldn't be here," Javier said, his voice low and steady. The harsh overhead lights cast his face into stark relief, every muscle taut with menace. Lila met his gaze with equal defiance. "Neither should you." The silence between them crackled with unspoken threats. Then, without warning, Javier stepped aside, a subtle acknowledgement that the lines of control were blurring, that even the enforcers were caught in the expanding web of uncertainty. Back in the safety of her apartment, Lila stared out at the cityscape, the weight of the ongoing fight pressing down on her. The echoes of control whispered from every corner, digital shadows, fractured memories, unseen invasions. Yet beneath the unease burned a steely resolve. The fight for autonomy was no longer just about exposing secrets. It was about reclaiming the sanctity of the mind itself. She typed a message to Ethan and Naomi, her words brief but charged with determination. "We adapt or we lose everything." Outside, the skyscraper stood tall, a beacon of wealth and power. But 10 floors below, amidst the flickering screens and humming machines, the true battle for freedom raged on, unseen but no less fierce. Lila Morgan was ready to face it, whatever it took. As the night deepened, a new alert flashed on her screen. Someone or something was watching. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The fight was far from over. Lila Morgan stood at the head of the table, her piercing gaze sweeping across a diverse assembly of activists, legal experts, and journalists. The glow of multiple projectors cast ghostly images of confidential documents, encrypted files, and hidden camera footage onto the walls, painting a damning picture of the corporation's crimes. "What you see here is not just surveillance," Lila began, her voice steady and clear despite the gravity of the moment. "It's a deliberate assault on freedom, identity, and human dignity." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Faces reflected the flickering images, some registering shock, others a hardening resolve. Ethan Shaw leaned against a nearby table, his rugged features drawn tight in concentration. "We've been silent for too long," he added, "but now, with this evidence, we have the power to demand change." The meeting was more than a gathering, it was a turning point. Plans were laid out to distribute the data securely to media outlets worldwide, ensuring the corporation's reach could no longer shield its darkest secrets. But the risks were clear. Every transmission was a gamble, inviting cyber attacks and reprisals. Still, Lila's determination was unshaken. She knew the fight had only just begun. Later, in a cramped room filled with the glow of monitors and the rhythmic clack of keyboards, Lila and Ethan coordinated the live stream that would bring the scandal to millions. The cybernetic pulse of the city outside seemed distant here, replaced by the urgent digital battle unfolding on screen. Firewalls cracked and reformed like shifting fortresses as waves of attacks assailed their network. "They're trying to shut us down," Ethan grunted, eyes fixed on the cascading lines of code. "But we're not going anywhere." Layla's fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing blocks, rerouting data, amplifying the broadcast. The world was watching now, and the veil was lifting from the skyscraper's shadowy underbelly. Messages of support and outrage flooded in, each a spark fanning the flames of resistance. Parallel to the digital onslaught, Dr. Naomi Chen faced a different kind of battlefield. Standing before a panel of regulatory officials, she recounted the harrowing human cost of the experiments. Her voice trembled at first, betraying the weight of years spent in silent complicity, but grew stronger with each word. "These are not just data points," she implored. "They are lives, families shattered, minds stolen." The cold sterility of the chamber clashed with the raw emotion Naomi conveyed, forcing the panel to confront uncomfortable truths. Calls for investigations and reforms echoed off the polished walls. Naomi's testimony became a beacon for ethical responsibility, galvanizing momentum for change. Outside the skyscraper, the city's neon glow mingled with the rising sun as crowds gathered, their chants a chorus of defiance. Signs bearing slogans like "Memory is sacred" and "Stop mind control" bobbed in the cyberpunk haze. Holographic news reports flickered above, broadcasting live images of the protest and the unfolding scandal. Hope was tangible here, electric in the air. Yet, amid the victories, shadows lurked. The corporation's loyalists whispered threats, and unseen eyes tracked the movement's every step. Lila knew this was no simple battle, but a war for the soul of a society teetering on the edge of technological domination. As dawn broke over the city skyline, Lila allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The journey had been harrowing, memory fragments pieced together, betrayals uncovered, lives risked and lost. But now, standing at the forefront of a movement that could reshape the future, she felt an ember of hope ignite deep within. "This is just the beginning," she murmured, the weight of responsibility settling like armor around her. "We have opened the door, now we have to make sure it stays open." And with that, Lila turned back to the screens. The fight for freedom and identity far from over, her resolve burning brighter than ever. Lila Morgan sat rigidly in the chair, eyes closed, breathing shallow and uneven. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold metal, a clinical scent that contrasted sharply with the storm raging inside her mind. Fractured memories flickered like broken film reels behind her eyelids, disjointed faces, half-heard voices, and flashes of places she couldn't place. Every fragment brought with it a surge of confusion and dread. She clenched her fists, trying to anchor herself to the present, but the pull of the past was relentless. "Steady, Lila," Naomi's voice was soft but steady, a lifeline in the chaos. She adjusted a dial on the neural interface, her delicate fingers moving with careful precision. "The process is working. You're stabilizing the synaptic pathways." Lila opened her eyes slowly. The dim light revealed Naomi's pale face framed by dark hair pulled back into a tight bun. Despite the clinical setting, there was warmth in her gaze, a fragile hope that Lila desperately needed to grasp. From the corner of the room, Ethan Shaw watched intently. His tall frame was tense with vigilance, every muscle coiled as if ready to spring into action. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his rugged charm replaced by raw focus. "You're doing great," he said quietly, almost there. The memory stabilization process was invasive and exhausting. Ethan had engineered the neural interface to interface with Lila's brainwaves, working in tandem with Naomi's medical knowledge to coax her fractured memories back into coherence. The risk was high, too much stimulation could trigger a complete mental shutdown or worse, deeper erasure. But without it, Layla's mind would remain a fractured labyrinth, vulnerable to the corporation's manipulations. Suddenly, a violent flashback seized her, a kaleidoscope of distorted images and voices screaming in discordant harmony. Layla gasped, clutching the arms of the chair as the room spun around her. Faces from her past and strangers melded into a terrifying mosaic. She felt herself slipping, drowning in the chaos of false memories and suppressed truths. "Focus on my voice," Naomi urged, moving closer with a reassuring hand on Lila's shoulder. "You're safe. You're here." Ethan quickly adjusted the interface, sending a calibrated pulse designed to ground her consciousness. Gradually, the storm subsided. Layla's breathing slowed as the fragments began to align, memories no longer shards but pieces of a clearer picture. Hours passed in this fragile balance between darkness and light. With every breakthrough, Lila felt the weight of her past lifting, replaced by a growing clarity and determination. The scars left by the corporation's experiments were deep, but not insurmountable. As dawn's first light filtered through the grimy window, Layla opened her eyes fully. She met Naomi's gentle smile and Ethan's relieved nod, a silent acknowledgement of progress hard won. "It's not over," Lila whispered, voice hoarse but resolute, "but I'm getting back to myself." Naomi nodded, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "You're stronger than they ever imagined." Ethan exhaled, the tension easing from his frame. "And we're right here with you." The journey to reclaim her mind was far from complete. Shadows of manipulation lingered at the edges, threats still looming in the corporate underworld. But for the first time in a long while, Lila felt the fragile edge of control return to her grasp, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. As the city outside stirred awake, the skyscraper loomed silent and indifferent, concealing secrets that still pulsed 10 floors below. But inside this small, battered room, a quiet rebellion took root. The fight for memory, identity, and freedom had just edged forward. And Lila Morgan was ready to face whatever came next. Her mind, once fractured and manipulated, was beginning to mend. But the question lingered like a shadow. How much of her true self could she truly reclaim before the corporation struck back? The edge of memory was a battleground, and the war was far from over. She took a slow, steadying breath and prepared herself. The fight for autonomy was just beginning, and this time she would not be broken. Lila Morgan stood on the rooftop of her skyscraper, the cool morning air brushing against her face, carrying distant sounds of a city slowly waking from slumber. Below her, the streets hummed with life cars rolling, voices rising, footsteps tapping. It was a fragile new day, one that felt less like an end and more like a cautious beginning. For the first time in months, Lila allowed herself a moment to breathe, to acknowledge the small victories rippling outward from her relentless fight. The broadcast that exposed the sinister mind control experiments had shaken the very foundations of corporate power and government complicity. News outlets dissected every detail. Social media buzzed with hashtags and heated debates. Yet shadows lingered, whispers of retaliation. Subtle attempts to rewrite narratives and unseen eyes tracking her every move. In the cramped apartment she shared with Ethan and Naomi, the trio huddled around a laptop, faces illuminated by the flickering screen. Ethan's easy smile was tempered by the weight of recent threats. Naomi's delicate features bore the strain of moral conflict, and Layla's piercing gaze scanned the endless stream of updates. "Look at this," Ethan said, pointing at a live feed of protests igniting across the city. "People are waking up. They're not just angry, they want change?" Naomi nodded, her voice steady but soft. "The scientific community is divided. Some demand accountability. Others fear the backlash could stall legitimate research." Lila leaned forward, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "We've opened a door no one can close now. But that means the fight isn't over. They'll come for us harder, smarter. We have to be ready." The room fell into a charged silence before Ethan broke it, his tone both reassuring and earnest. "We're not alone anymore. This is bigger than us." Days blurred into weeks as Lila navigated a labyrinth of public inquiries, legal battles, and covert threats. Walking through city parks, she overheard conversations, some hopeful, others steeped in suspicion. Faces reflected the complex emotions sweeping society: relief, fear, anger, and an aching desire for justice. The skyscraper, once a prison of secrets, had become a symbol of resistance. Yet, every victory was shadowed by the cost she bore. Memories still fractured, trust remained a fragile currency, and the scars, both visible and hidden, reminded her of what had been sacrificed. On quiet nights, by the dim glow of a solitary lamp, Lila would write in her journal, her hands trembling as she poured thoughts of loss, identity, and the faint flame of hope onto the page. "Resistance isn't just about fighting," she wrote one evening. "It's about holding on to who you are when everything tries to take it away." Her resolve hardened with each word. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers lurking beneath every digital shadow and whispered conversation. But amid the chaos, a flicker of hope endured, a fragile light kindled by the courage to confront darkness and reclaim autonomy. As the city pulsed with the first true breath of change, Lila Morgan stood ready. Not as a solitary hacker lost in the labyrinth of her past, but as a beacon for those who dared to resist, to remember, and to fight for the freedom of mind and spirit. The battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she believed the future might just be worth it. And with that belief, she stepped forward into the uncertain dawn, a flicker of hope lighting the way. Dawn was breaking, washing the city below in hues of pale gold and lavender. She paused at the edge, the cool metal railing steady beneath her hands, and gazed out at the sprawling urban landscape, an endless sea of lights dimming as the sun claimed the sky. The air smelled faintly of rain and concrete, a blend so familiar yet now carrying the weight of everything she had endured. 10 floors below, beneath layers of steel and secrecy, the sub-basement lay silent. The place where her life had been shattered and remade, where memory had been a battleground and identity a contested prize. Lila's thoughts were a tangled web of images and emotions, fragments of faces, whispers of erased moments, the cold gaze of Dr. Marcus Vell, and the fierce determination that had driven her through every dark corridor and encrypted firewall. She had come so far, yet the journey was far from over. The broadcast had shaken the world awake, exposing the monstrous experiments and the corporate greed that had fueled them. Governments scrambled, investigations launched, and the skyscraper's walls began to close in on the culpable. But the shadows lingered. The technology remained, and so did the people who would wield it. Turning away from the edge, Lila slipped back into her apartment, a sanctuary that now felt both familiar and alien. Screens flickered with streams of data, decrypted files, and recovered memory fragments. Each piece was a shard of a shattered past she was painstakingly reconstructing. Sitting at the desk, fingers trembling slightly, she scrolled through images of herself, some real, some implanted, trying to anchor her identity in the sea of uncertainty. The ache was sharp, a reminder that the cost of resistance was etched deep into her psyche. A soft knock interrupted her solitude. Ethan's familiar silhouette appeared in the doorway, his easy smile tempered by exhaustion. Behind him, Naomi Chun stepped silently, her eyes reflecting a quiet resolve. They gathered around the table, a fragile circle of trust forged in the fires of shared struggle. "We're not done," Ethan said simply, voice steady but weary. "The fight's just changed." Naomi nodded, fingers tapping on the keyboard. "There are still traces, fragments of the technology, pockets of surveillance. We'll need to dismantle them, piece by piece." Layla looked between them, feeling the weight of their support and the fragile hope it inspired. "Then we keep pushing. For the ones who can't fight. For the truth that still hides in the dark." Together they planned into the night. The glow of the laptop casting shadows that danced on the wall, shadows that no longer lurked with menace, but with possibility. Days later, Layla found herself wandering the sterile halls of the sub-basement. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint hum of dormant machinery. She traced a hand along the cold metal walls, feeling the chill seep into her bones. This place had been a prison for minds and bodies alike, a crucible of control and manipulation. But now it was a monument to resistance. Her footsteps echoed softly as she moved through the corridors, memories flooding back in bursts: fear, pain, courage. She remembered the faces of those lost to the experiments, the whispered promises of freedom, and the burning need to reclaim autonomy. Lila closed her eyes, drawing a steadying breath. "I am still me," she whispered, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "And I will fight to keep it that way." Outside, the city pulsed with life, oblivious to the battles waged beneath its gleaming surface. But Lila Morgan was awake, now vigilant, unyielding, a beacon for those who dared to resist. 10 floors below had tested her, broken her, and remade her. And from those depths, she emerged ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. As the sun rose higher, spilling light across the skyline, Lila stepped forward. The war for minds was far from over, but so was her fight. And in that moment, beneath the vast expanse of sky, she found something precious: hope.